Extreme.
Velocity.
Ignite.
Yeah, I'm going to ignite.
The edge.
The dive.
The bridge. The ramp.
Fire.
Courageous. Passion. Echo. Reverb.
Noise.
Velocity. Drive.
Elevate.
Radiate.
722.
635.
419.
Orange.
Blue.
Yellow. Green. Clear. Neon.
Catalyst conference this year.
If you have your Bibles, we're going to go to Acts chapter 2 today. Acts chapter 2 is where we're going to be at today. We're going to talk about the big word, and this is the last week in our series. We're going to talk about the word community. Community is a word that churches throw about like crazy. You know, we talk about being in a community, and if you're living in Pearland, then you're in a community. West Pearland is a community. There are communities, you're probably living in a master planned community if you're in Shadow Creek Ranch, and community is a word that's used a lot in the business world, a lot in just social environments, but the church, we kind of cling to this word as well, and we want to be a certain kind of community. We want to be a community that, we want to be a gospel-centered community. We want to be a community that centers around and focuses on the gospel. If you have your Bibles, Acts chapter 2 is where we're going to be. We're going to look at verse 42, and we're going to read through 47. Ready? On your mark, get set. And they, the early Christians, devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and the fellowship, to the breaking of bread and the prayers. And awe came upon every soul. And many wonders and signs were being done through the apostles. And all who believed were together and had all things in common. And they were selling their possessions and belongings and distributing the proceeds to all as any had need. Day by day, attending the temple together and breaking bread in their homes, they received their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having favor with all the people. And the Lord added to the number day by day those who were being saved. So what happens right before this? Acts chapter 1, if you were to look back in Acts chapter 1, you're going to see the disciples, the apostles, they're gathered on a hill. And on that hill, Jesus is talking to them. Now they think, they're kind of in this realm of saying, hey, if I stand right here, you get the reverb. Do you hear that right there? If I move over here, a little less. So they're on this hill, and Jesus is talking to them on this hill, and they're thinking, all right, even in that moment, they're thinking, all right, it's about to go on. Now is the time where we're going to start taking over politically. Like, it's going to happen. And then Jesus says some things, and then just imagine being there. Jesus talks, and then starts going up. Starts going up. And I wonder when they were first like, oh, maybe our plan isn't what's going to go on, because he's going up into heaven in a cloud, and there he's gone. What did he say to them? Well, he said, hey, it's your job to go be witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the uttermost parts of the world. Go out and spread the gospel. Take the word and go. And so Acts chapter 1, they get this instruction, then Jesus is gone. Crazy. I mean, if you don't think that's weird, then you're weird. We believe a man actually lived and came and died and then rose again, and then he went up into heaven in the clouds, and that's what Christians believe. So we have some weird things, okay? And he does that, and then they try to, they're replacing Judas. They're trying to find this replacement guy, and then Acts chapter 2 happens, and they're up in this upper room, kind of praying and worship and thinking, like, what are we going to do, and how does this happen? And then it says like a mighty rushing wind came in, and it went through all of them, and then they had like flames of fire over their heads. It looked like tongues. All right? Anybody? Listen, it's weird, okay? You can think it's weird, okay? And then they've got this thing, and then they walk out, and suddenly these are men who, let's see. How do you, like, they're fishermen, so they're blue collar, and they're not the smartest of the blue collar guys. Like, they're down on the, okay, so my grandfather didn't finish 6th grade, super smart man, but never finished 6th grade, so he never got above an education. My grandfather never finished 6th grade. These guys would be like down on the, I don't know, like probably the Blaze Judson level, my 5 and 3-year-old, like in terms of intellectual ability. That's these guys, and then all of a sudden these guys, these 12 men, they go out there and they are speaking in languages that they've never learned. In fact, what it says in Acts chapter 2 is that they're wondering, how do these men, these uneducated fishermen, these uneducated men, how do they know our language? Because in Jerusalem's a major trading capital. People would come from all over the globe to trade here. And when they would come from all over the globe to trade here, they were speaking all kinds of different languages. In Jerusalem, these men, these uneducated fishermen, start speaking. And they start hearing the gospel in their own language. God gave these men the supernatural ability to speak languages they didn't know and to be understood. And on that day, it says 3,000 people came to know Jesus. 3,000 people trusted Christ and were baptized. And that was the beginning of what we would call the local church, of which CityView is a local church. And in that day, 3,000 people came to know. And what ends up happening here in Acts chapter 2, in verse 42 through 47, we just read, is the layout, is the blueprint of the way the church is supposed to operate. It lays out what happened at first. How did these things get off the ground? How did it launch out? And so that's what we're going to talk through today as we talk about Christian community. Acts chapter 2, verse 42, look again, it says this, and they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching. So let me write this down. Christian community is devoted to the gospel. Christian community is devoted to the gospel. It says apostles' teaching, Jason. What does that mean? So what the apostles were, they were the men who walked and talked with Jesus. They were the men who understood who Jesus was teaching all the time. He's teaching them, he's teaching parables. Remember, Jesus teaches in these kind of parables that are difficult to understand if you're just listening to them. But what Jesus does, he pulls these men back and says, hey, this is what this means. And Jesus spends 3.5 years teaching these men in parables and teaches men just straight up what the church is about, who God is, and what the gospel is. And so when it says that they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, they're devoting themselves to what Jesus taught them. So these men are learning the gospel directly from Jesus, then they are seeing the gospel lived out. Jesus came, he died, and he rose again. And so they are watching this man, and they are then teaching about this man, his connection to the Old Testament, what he taught was going to happen, what he taught was going to come. And so the people, these first 3,000 members, and all the people ever since then, they are devoted to the gospel. Christian community is always devoted to the gospel. And when that Christian community is not devoted to the gospel, then that community ceases to be a Christian community. Does that make sense? The church is supposed to be the Christian community, and Christian community is devoted to the gospel. There are a lot of 501c3s today that are called churches that aren't really biblical churches. They have a 501c3 designation so they can get tax-deductible contributions. But those places are not churches unless they are they're not biblical churches unless they are devoted to the gospel. CityView Church, we're going to say this over and over again, is going to be devoted to the gospel. This is the kind of place we are going to be. And as a community of believers, this is what we are focusing on day in and day out, to be focused on the good news of Jesus, who he is, what he's done. We want to focus on that over and over again. So Lindley's going to get slapped in the face if he's not singing songs about who Jesus is and what he's done. He's going to get slapped in the face anyway, let's just be honest. But that will just be by my kids. It won't be by me specifically. The gospel is what we're going to focus on in every aspect of what we do, because that's the only thing that's really worthwhile. Does that make sense? We're not going to be a church that does 10 steps for better living, 5 steps to improve your leadership capacity. We're not going to do that stuff. We're going to be a church that is about the good news of Jesus Christ, because that's what the Christian community needs to be devoted to. Number 2, Christian community is given to genuine fellowship. Verse 42, and they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and the fellowship. And then it goes on to kind of describe what that is, to the breaking of bread and the prayers. So I've grown up in churches, awesome churches. I love the church that I grew up in. It was called Faith Baptist in Dearborn Heights, Michigan. Love those people. They are wonderful people. And loved Jesus, saw people come to the Lord constantly. They were devoted to the gospel. And we had fellowships, and fellowships always meant they were just this specific time after church where we had cookies and punch. Who loves cookies and punch? Right? Depends on the cookie. If they're homemade, they're good. And then after a while, what happens is it goes from like homemade to Oreo to those right? Those cookies in a bag, essentially. And then it's not that good anymore. And that was what fellowship was. There's nothing wrong with those things. There's nothing wrong with having some cake and punch together, eating some of those things together. There's nothing wrong with that kind of time together. But what fellowship is, well, it's based on a Greek word. The Greek word is koinonia. And what that Greek word is, it means common. And so when we talk about what a fellowship is, we're talking about the thing that we all have in common. Does that make sense? So when you hear the word fellowship, it means that we're going to come around something that we have in common. Any Lord of the Ring fans here? No? Okay. Nobody wants to own up to that because that would make you a nerd, right? I love the Lord of the Rings. I'll own it. Allie may have made it through the first 10 minutes of one of them with me and then was snooze fest after that. She does not enjoy the weird battle scenes. I love the weird battle scenes. I love it when the ghosts, they get up and they just like sweep across. Why don't we go get that army in the beginning? Why are we waiting till, what was that, second or third movie to go get that army? What's the matter with us? And do you remember the first movie was called The Fellowship of the Ring? There's the nerds. I love you. And now we're working together. And so they are centered around, and the thing they have in common is the ring. Like that's the thing. They're all weird. You got an elf, you got a dwarf, right? Tall who lives forever but can die in battle, whatever. And dwarf who has a battle axe and a super long beard. And then hobbits, awesome feet. And they're all this weird group of people are coming together around one thing, a ring. It's a great picture for what the church is. And if you know J.R.R. Tolkien, he was a believer. He and C.S. Lewis were friends. They walked together, they learned together, they talked together. And their books, the things they wrote, were allegories for the greater story of the gospel. And so when he's writing about the fellowship of the ring and what they're trying to do with it, the thing he's trying to bring up is that from all different creatures, tongues, tribes, they will all come together around this thing. And he's saying, hey, the church, hey, believers, we are from all different tribes, tongues, colors, backgrounds, abilities, looks, and we have this fellowship, and we're centered around the gospel. So our fellowship is not about we like Jason's preaching or not Jason's preaching. Our fellowship is not we like Lindley's worship or not Lindley's worship. We like the children's ministry or not the children's ministry. Our fellowship is not around cookies and punch. Our fellowship is centered around the gospel because that is the thing that we have in common. That's why if you meet a believer from anywhere else in this world, you can sit down and have something immediately in common with them. Immediately in common with them. I have a friend, I graduated this last week, and I have a friend, he's from Chicago. Today he's preaching in his regalia, so his church bought him this crazy big robe, and it's, please, that is not a request. Do not buy me that garbage, okay? And he had this robe and his funny hat on and the whole deal. And he's preaching that today. And he is from Nigeria. And he and I have, if you were to look at us, we have nothing in common. He's tall, I'm short. He's skinny, I'm chubby. And we've got nothing in common. But we had classes together. And we sat down. And we had the gospel in common. And when you find that, if you sit and you spend time with anybody from a different culture that has the gospel at the center of their lives, you're going to find this amazing fellowship. But here's the thing. As we're a Christian community centered in West Pearland, centered in the Houston area, what we end up having is a lot more in common, but at the core of what we have in common is the gospel. And so that should amplify our fellowship even more because we have more in common and the gospel is at the center. So when we talk about fellowship, we want you at your life groups to eat together, to talk together, spend time together. We want you to go to lunch together. We want you to have breakfast together. We want you to do all kinds of things together as part of a church. But what we want you to have in common most is the gospel. We want you to talk about that thing all the time with one another because you need each other to drive each other on. That's what true, real fellowship is. That true fellowship is centered around the gospel. Number 3. Verse 43. And awe came upon every soul, and many signs and wonders were being done through the apostles. Number 3, Christian community is awe-inspiring. Have you ever thought about what normal Christians believe? I mentioned it a little earlier. We believe that a man who was also God was born of a virgin woman, that this guy who was born was named Jesus, and that this guy who was born named Jesus was foretold thousands of years beforehand, and that he had lived, and he lived perfectly, and then he died on a cross, and then he died on a cross, and he rose again, and then he raised from the dead, and we believe that. Like that's what Christians believe, and that's a good thing, amen? You can say amen to that, that's good. And so that's what we believe. And then, like what Christians do as a result of what we believe. Have you ever thought about this? We get baptized. Last week we got to baptize Reese D'Almeida. He came to know Jesus. We got to baptize him. We got to show what that is. Where else in society, not in a pool, are you dunking people underwater and bringing them back up? For fun, right? And we celebrate that thing. Where else in society are you reading an ancient book? Every day, every other day. Where else in society are you brought together with a diverse cross-section of nationalities and ethnicities? And you aren't competing or angry with one another, but you're there together. Where else in society are you having white-collar and blue-collar, millionaires and out of work? Where else in society is that happening? Where else in society are you encouraged to give 10%? Christians, we give 10% to our churches. We're generous people. We see other people's needs, and we don't throw a $25 thing to the Salvation Army on it. We say, what do you need? Come stay with us. What do you need? Come be with us. Can we give you clothes? Can we give you shelter? Can we give you help? What other place in the world is like the Christian community? There's nothing. There's nothing like this in all the world. We are supposed to be awe-inspiring. We talk about this all the time, that how are they going to know us? How do outsiders know who believers are? Well, it's definitely by the way we vote, right? Right? No. It's definitely by t-shirts, right? You got to wear the right t-shirt or have the fish on the back of your car, right? Who's got the metal fish on the back there? Not a problem if you do, but that's how everybody knows you're a Christian. Or bumper stickers. They've kind of gone away, right? We don't really do the bumper sticker thing anymore. Or today it's social media, so what kind of things are you sharing? That's how they're going to know you're Christians. If you like this thing, then Jesus knows that you care about him, right? And if you share it, then people really know that you love Jesus. And if you don't, then you're embarrassed of him, and he's going to deny you before the Father, obviously. Sorry, personal soapbox. I'm going to have to get off that thing real fast. No. Jesus tells us. And let me say this. Don't wear a Christian t-shirt. No problem. Whatever. Have the fish on the back of your car. That's fine too. Have bumper stickers. If you want bumper stickers, take a CityView one. No issues there. Those things are not wrong. Those things are good. Those things are healthy. Those things are fine. But the way that people know that you're part of the Christian community is not by what you wear or the things you say or don't say or the things you do or don't do. The way they know that you're part of a Christian community is that you have love for each other. That you go out of your way to care for those who, under any other normal circumstance, you would not. Who you might have kind thoughts for, but you go out of your way. You are compelled to help. When things are not going well, you're there to help bring them back. When they're broken, you're there for them. When they're joyful, you're there for them. That's what community is about. That's what Christian community, that's why it's awe-inspiring, because it's different than everything else that gets seen in society. If you sit here and you're thinking, Jason, I don't know how that works. I've never been part of that. Where I've never been walked through with pain and trouble and strife. I've never done that. Be part of CityView. Jason, I don't know how to get into that. Come talk. We want to help. We want to be there. We want to be the community for you that comes around and encourages you when things are bad. Because let's be honest, things are bad. Things go wrong. And let me say this. I don't do this perfectly. I don't do this perfectly. I want to do this better. We need each other to come together and be with one another as we struggle. Because life's a struggle. Yes? No? And we need each other to spur each other on. We need each other. It's an awe-inspiring thing when it happens. Number 4. Christian community is generous. Verse 44, and all who believed were together and had all things in common. And they were selling their possessions and belongings and distributing the proceeds to all as any had need. So here's the thing. They had needs. Guess who helped with the needs? The government did, obviously. I mean, it was a welfare program. No. When you were a Christian in Roman government, at first you were just killed. Like, that was not a thing. They were not cool with you being a Christian. They did not like that there was another Lord outside of Caesar. They didn't like that you had another king other than Caesar. So Christians were crucified upside down. This was not a thing that was thought well of in the early church. No, the government didn't have anything to do with it. Today, Americans, we've kind of gotten to this world where we think that's part of the government's job. I think this might be one of the greatest failings in the church, is that we've outsourced some of the care for those who are broken, some of the care for those who are poor, to our government. And then we complain about the way entitlements and welfare works. I don't like it as a person who votes. I don't really like that stuff. But hey, Christian, how are you helping to care for those needs? How are you doing that? I was soapbox, sorry. Here's the thing. Christians are called to be generous. That means outside the church and inside the church. Let me commend you for something. CityView Church, you are a generous church. I am blown away by the way giving happens at CityView Church. We're a church, we have about 150 people on a regular basis. We say we have about 200 regular attenders. And of that equals down to about 50 to 60 households who give. So I looked at our numbers. We have about 53 households inside of CityView Church. Do you know what the average giving per person nationwide is? So average giving per person nationwide, per head per week. So what is that number? Nationwide, they do these studies, they do these numbers. The number is $20 per person per week. That's average. So if you have 100 people within your church and you're looking at probably $20 per head per week, that means $2,000, which you can think of averaged over the year is what they're going to have in their budget. So about $104,000, right? CityView, you guys are so generous, so blessed by this. We track this, we've tracked it from the beginning. We have consistently been right at $41 per person per head per week. So we double that national average. That's amazing. Yes, come on. Yeah, be happy for yourselves. You're good at this. Here's the thing. We started this giving campaign at the beginning of this year, right? To say, hey, let's buy land. Number one, you guys accomplished that a month ahead of schedule. Now, that doesn't mean stop giving. Keep giving, okay? Please. You accomplished that a month ahead of schedule. And here's the thing. Normally when giving campaigns happen, this is just a known thing, giving goes down. Tithes and offering goes down. You know what happened? Giving went up. We did this. So we go from, hey, let's raise some money for funds, and what we're going to do as a church, we're going to tighten our belts on how we're going to spend money. We're going to be real careful. Now, we still did that, but we get to our goal a month early, and the giving that we had already had generous plans for. You are already quite generous, and as we make the budget out for the year to come, you were already extremely generous there. The giving actually went up. So we planned to have to dip into our outside entity giving. We get still funds from outside to help us meet budget. We planned to have to do that throughout the year. We planned to have to do that last year too. You know, we didn't have to do it all. Tap into those gifts. CityView Church, you guys are a generous, giving church. And I just want to commend you. Like a lot of times pastors get up and they're just like angry and yelling and screaming and mad and pounding fists and stuff. Give more, give more, give more. No, you are a church that's generous and giving. Thank you. Thank you. It's a joy to be your pastor. When I sit down with other pastors who are struggling talking about giving, they ask, Jason, what's your budget? And I'm like, I don't want to say because you're going to feel bad about yourself. Because I serve a church that I don't think you just give because well, we better give or else we're in trouble. I think that you give out of the joy of your heart because of what Jesus has done. And I am honored to be a part of that church. I'm so thankful to be a part of that church. Here's the thing. I know not everyone gives, right? Some of you guys are getting commended, and you're like, I feel bad about this. Well, start giving. Start. There is joy in giving. There is joy in giving. And CityView Church is a church that takes that stewardship of that money seriously. Just want to encourage you along the way there. Let's go on. Number 5, Christian community is centered around worship. Verse 46, and day by day, attending the temple together and breaking bread in their homes, they receive their food with glad and generous hearts. So what they're doing is they go to church every day. Who wants to do setup and tear down every day? Come on. Anybody? No, okay. Well, just me. All right. Not me. What they do is they're coming together all the time for worship. They're coming together all the time for worship. Well, let me go somewhere here real fast. You encourage someone else by your presence here during worship. Does that make sense? You, all of you, are encouraging someone else by your presence here during worship. You don't understand that. You think you're getting, on Sunday mornings, you're thinking, my kids are crazy, I've got to curl my hair, I've got to get this thing and this thing and this thing together, we've got to get out the door on time, and and you aren't realizing that your being here, just your presence, regardless of how you get here. You get here with your hair crazy, your kids run around like nuts, their shirts are untucked, they've got pockets out, whatever. You being here is a blessing. Number 1. Number 2, part of you coming together here. I mean, it's a command that's given. Hebrews 10 says that we aren't supposed, as believers in Jesus, we aren't supposed to forsake the coming together of ourselves. So we aren't supposed to, we'll put it in modern language, don't skip worship. Don't skip. Now, if you're out of town, you're out of town. If you're on vacation, you're on vacation. And if crazy things happen, we understand. We deal with all things in grace. But understand something on a larger level. You being here is a great encouragement. You being part of here is a great encouragement. I mean, we can go practically. The band doesn't want to play for, if there's less people out here than there is in the band, it's hard for the band to play, okay? If there's 2 people out here and 6 people up there, they're kind of sad, right? If I'm preaching and there's more of me up here than there are of you out there, then I'm really sad. But, well, let me say it like this. Our tendency, when things go wrong in our lives, is to isolate. Does that make sense? When things are a mess in our lives, our tendency is to run. Let me say it like this. When things are bad in our lives, our flesh and our sinful nature says isolate. But what you need in the middle of that is not isolation. You need Christian community. You need that. I need that. In the darkest times of my life, where I've struggled in different areas, different ways, different places, when depression has kind of pulled up or despair has kind of been there, I was a pastor, so I had to go to church still, right? Like, I don't get the option to skip. But you can still kind of isolate inside of a large group of people. But what meant so much to me is when people would just draw me out and want to be part of that community with me, even though I didn't really want that. It's a little fake it till you make it kind of thing. But in the end, it was good for me. I needed the encouragement of that. And here's the thing, believer. You need it too. So let me say this. If you know someone's struggling, you've had some relationship with them, there's been some pain, there's been some hurt, there's been something going on. And maybe they're not here this morning. Let's get real practical. They're not here this morning, they weren't here last week, something like that. I reach out to them as best I can. But here's the thing. I can't remember everybody. My brain is finite. I am weak. I forget things. Also, if God's brought them to your mind, maybe you should be contacting them. Believer, we've talked about this before. My job is to equip saints for the work of ministry and also do ministry. Your job is to do ministry. If God's brought someone to mind who's missing, someone who's going through a hard time, who may have isolated themselves in the middle of this, call. You don't have to go into the depth of whatever the problem is. Hey, let's jump into the biggest pain in your life right now. Just knowing that you care, just knowing that you miss them, speaks volumes. Okay? All right, off that. Number 6. Christian community is thankful day by day, attending the temple together and breaking bread in their homes. So they're just spending all their time together. They receive their food with glad and generous hearts. You're praising God. This is simple. They understood where all the things came from. They understood where all the stuff was from. They understood that it wasn't from them that it came, but that it was from God that it came. They understood what James taught. James, he was actually the pastor of this church. That all good gifts come down from the Father of lights. All of them. Promotion you get, or hey, guess what? Promotion you don't get. Raise, or even not raise. Bigger house, not bigger house. More stuff, less stuff. Baby, you get. All of those things are good gifts from the Father. They all come from the Father. They all descend down like that. And so they understand that all this stuff, whatever's going on, they're thankful because it's come from Him. And that's for their good. Number 7. Christian community grows. Praising God and having favor with all the people, and the Lord added to their number day by day those who were being saved. And so here's what else goes on. It grows. And in this instant, it grows by addition. This church continues to get bigger and bigger and bigger. That's the hope for CityView, that CityView would continue to get bigger and bigger and bigger. But here's what goes on next, is that eventually this church gets too big, and God disperses them to the ends of the earth. They have to go to Samaria. They have to go to the rest of Judea, which is where Jerusalem is. They have to go to Samaria. Then they have to go to the other parts of the world. And Acts 13 is this paramount passage where these elders are praying together in the church in Antioch. And as they're praying together, God calls them to go and multiply, to go and be a church that plants other churches. And so that growth shouldn't be additional. It's not necessarily about adding more people to our awesome black chairs in our little school here. It's about exponential growth, which means we need to be a church that plants churches. And that needs to be not just about our church growing, but about the larger body of Christ growing, that it's not about our kingdom. It's not CityView's building a kingdom in Pearland to be awesome. I was talking to somebody earlier this week, and they were asking, well, why are you building a building? Are you just trying to enhance your kingdom? No, we're not trying to enhance our kingdom. We're trying to build a bare bones building so that we can do worship there and send people out from there. We want to be a church that grows exponentially. And that doesn't mean that we have 1 million people worshiping here with us. It means that we understand Houston's growing like crazy. And there needs to be churches all over the place. And that, are we going to be the answer to that? Is CityView going to be the answer to that problem? Some of you guys are like, no, yes. Do I answer this question? I don't know. Maybe. Really, our hope is that we would inspire a movement of other church plants. That those churches would sacrifice to make this thing happen. That other churches would catch a vision to say, all right, you know what? We're small, we're little, we can plant too. We can do this, and we can see God's kingdom come here, and we can see awesome things happen because we are a church that cares about that people are dying and going to hell. And that they need Jesus. And that, you know what, the other stuff that all churches think matter, choir robes, wall color, whatever, we can be a church that says those things don't matter here because the gospel is more important than that thing. The gospel is bigger than that. The spread of the gospel is more than that. So the church grows, but it doesn't just grow like little by little. The church is supposed to grow exponentially on a multiplication level that's beyond what we can understand. But a lot of time, what's happening in the American church, we've said, let's build our awesome, cool, big church here. Let's build our monster. Let's build our organization so it's big and we have lots of staff and we look awesome. Let me say this. I am not against the megachurch. There's nothing wrong with that. That's served in its own purpose. But this church is going to be a church that's about the multiplication of other congregations. That's why we have Joseph here. That's why he is a resident here. That's why we're interviewing other residents. That's why we sent Carrie Perrin down to Alvin. And that's why we send people, because we want to be a church that multiplies. This is who we're going to be for the long haul. So if you're looking for a church that's going to become big and have this giant building, we're not going to be that place for you. If you're looking for a church that cares about the gospel and wants to see it's impacting communities all over Houston and the world, then come home, man. This is the place.